So tell me about that piece.
It's called Lydia's Reflection. And actually, it's written for violin and cello. Um, so, I think there's an element of music that is always in conversation, whether that's with someone listening, like yourself, um, or when you're playing with someone else. Or there's the element of just when you're playing by yourself, you're in conversation with yourself and kind of in a certain way, all your life experiences. So I wrote that for my brother and myself to play, but he couldn't be here with us today. So made a version just for violin. And I think I'm interested, at times in that idea of the reflective quality of music where music can hold up a mirror to who you are and how you relate to the world.
Definitely. Must be nice to have that connection with your brother.
Yeah. I mean, it goes very deep, and I come from a family of musicians. Our dad played violin in the Metropolitan Opera for over 30 years, and in terms of home, we grew up being allowed to stay up late at night as little kids, which is what you want to do, right? If we were listening to the music they were playing, and early on, I think that that idea of falling asleep late at night while my parents were having a fun time playing music, that's I just get all warm and cozy thinking about it. So as soon as my brother and I were old enough, we started inviting friends over to do the same thing, basically.
Mm-hmm. What, your parents would play what instruments?
Our dad was a violinist and mom played flute. Yeah.
Wow, that must have been beautiful to fall asleep to.
Yeah, and they would get together with their friends for the equivalent of classical music jam sessions. We call them chamber music reading sessions, and they would just pick out from the library a piece of Beethoven's or Mozart and just play it for fun without rehearsing it. Just whatever would happen in the moment. And so that was what then my brother and I started doing with our friends when we were good enough and old enough to do that.
So all of that is very much wrapped up into your identity of what home is.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I still live with my brother. I mean, we live in Brooklyn in a building where he and his wife, who's a singer and songwriter from the Americana folk world, and my wife, who's a modern dancer, and our two kids, our kid and their kid, all live in the same building. So I'd say particularly, during the pandemic, that idea of home being the most important place became more apparent than it ever had, because up till then it's the swirl of life, of touring life as a musician or someone in the performing arts, and you always feel good to come home, but to go deep and to just where your world shrunk and then the whole world is at home for months, I think was a revelation. And as guilty as I feel saying it, kind of a beautiful part of our lives. So this last year was the best of times and the worst of times to be a musician. Yeah.
Well, I think it's going to be hard for people to go back to the pace of life that we knew formerly. I think a lot of people too are craving that old way of life, but I think there's so much about that old way of life that we should not be excited to get back to.
It's a good question. Yeah, it does feel like at this moment things are exploding 0 to 60, and yeah, part of me feels like, whoa, the roller coaster of life is back on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure about it, but
yeah. We'll
see how it goes. Yeah.
Inspiring for writing new music, I'm sure.
Yeah,
obviously.
Absolutely. Some good stuff came out of the last year. Yeah. That piece that I just played, Lydia's Reflection, I wrote about 10 years ago. And I had intended to write a series of violin-cello duets for my brother and I to do. And somehow many other projects in the last 10 years have taken over. But I ended up writing a new one at the beginning of this year. I was like, all right, it's a new year. We're going to look forward. I'm going to write a new duo for violin-cello. So we haven't played it yet together, but my wife has been choreographing it, and we're planning to do it, I think, later this summer at Little Island, that new, amazing
Oh yeah,
pier.
that looks
Yeah,
like high heels.
exactly. Yeah.
Do you think of that when I look at that? And I'm
Yeah,
like, looks like a bunch
totally.
of stiletto heels.
It's true.
Right there.
Yeah, it also looks like something out of Star Wars, like a 60s or 70s version of what the future looks like. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that,
Yeah.
like a Buck Rogers thing.
Yeah.
almost. So Lydia's Reflection, the title, where does that come from?
Well, it is a play on words because the Lydian mode is the sort of the scale that it's in, and but then just that idea of like the music is sort of mirroring itself, and I just wanted to write something that captured some of one of my great memories from childhood was this lake in Minnesota where my dad is from, and he has this like little cabin on a lake, and we would go there in summers, and just that sense of like when you get to dusk and the lake is completely still, it's a great feeling. So I capture some of that in music was the idea.
And the music your family or your mother and father would play maybe by themselves or I mean together in the evenings, is there anything in particular that you would always, that they would play more than once that you would always love to hear?
Oh yeah, probably there's a piece by Schubert, this cello quintet, so string quartet, 2 violins, viola, and 2 cellos. That would be definitely like desert island material for me. Yeah, just provides comfort. I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, like Schubert maybe of the classical cats, my favorite composer, possibly partly for that sense of like, he writes almost something that feels like it addresses the beginning of life and the end, that sense of like lullaby, what it means for you as you're entering this world and as you're exiting.
Can you share something with me?
Oh, from
along those
of
lines?
Schubert? Let's see. It's hard without the sonority of all those folks, but yeah, something like that. You need the harmony of all the other folks. It's like that's what it's about, is like that sonority, which is very rich. When you add even to a string quartet an extra cello, it gets this darkness. It's so beautiful.
So what is it about your chosen instrument that spoke to you?
I suppose like because my dad played it and it seemed glamorous
Yeah.
at the time. But I think there is something about an identification with the sonority of it. And for me, the violin represents, it can be very sweet, like a cello, like my brother plays, you get this dark richness, and resonance. With violin, it's a... You can get a real sweetness, yeah, and singing quality. I mean, most instruments are designed to mimic some aspect of the human voice, but I think like violin gets pretty close to something very soulful.
I don't know how to speak in terms of musical references, but how would you, some people say this is my spirit animal, this is your music animal, but what do you sound like? If you had to create a sound to communicate to somebody who you are, what would you say the sound that you could create right now, what would you say would communicate?
Well, maybe that would be a good segue to playing something else, which I was thinking about. Another favorite of so many string players is Bach, and partly because he happened to write great pieces for just the instrument alone, because so much of my life is spent either playing in ensembles, because putting your sound together with other people is like my favorite thing to do. But Bach really creates this ability to have a dialogue with oneself. And but I was thinking also how Bach, like when we think of him in terms of music out there, it's like architecture. You know, it's this. You talk about or architecture being a frozen kind of music, and Bach creates these incredible structures that are, but yet are not just dry structures. They're like full of human understanding, compassion, all the good stuff. And but I've had a lot of experience and great admiration for a Persian musician, a guy from Iran named Kayhan Kalhor, plays, you know, the cousin of the violin, the Persian version of that, which is called the Kamanche. And you know, one of the first things he tells me that you learn in Persian music, which is this vast system of modal music that you could think of as like learning 30,000 lines of poetry, memorizing text, you know, and then the idea is that then you can use that as vocabulary to improvise and write your own stuff with. But one of the first pieces you learn is called a darumad, which is an architectural term. It literally means doorway, or and of course Persian architecture, classic Islamic architecture, is some of the most beautiful in the world in the sense of proportion. So very different ideas of musical architecture, but I thought what I'd play for you is the darumad of Mahur, which is the major mode in Persian music. Very simple, but it really just sets up a sense of entering into a world, and that world I'm going to enter into is a piece by Bach. So jumping across cultures and centuries, I guess.
such a treat to sit out here and just listen to the leaves rustling and this music. It's thank
A
you for
porch in the middle of New York
yeah
City.
yeah. It's I was thinking in terms of comforting oneself. Self comfort is a thing I think a lot of people struggle with knowing how to do in the absence of maybe having an intimate partner. I'm thinking to myself, for someone who plays music, that's got to be just an automatic given, right? It's
Yeah, I mean, very lucky. Yeah,
yeah.
so lucky. I mean, but the thing is, I think music has so many entry points, and I think I think of my wife whose parents are from Hawaii, and they have an ukulele group, every Wednesday, and it used to be in a pizza parlor in San Diego, and it went virtual during the pandemic. I think it's still virtual. Maybe they're going to get back together soon, but um, you know, ukulele, like you can pick it up and probably learn 3 chords within a week and be playing songs and get that feeling of that you get from music. And so you can go as far as you want. The music thing is an endless ocean, and but I do feel lucky that there's an aspect of when I'm practicing that I'm alone, but I'm also communing with these people who are dead,
Mhm.
or people who are alive, or people who are not in the room. And when I play a piece of music that I've done since I'm a kid, it brings back a whole series of memories. And um, this piece that I just played for you, I mean, has been something that I've turned to a lot in the last year because it does give me that sense of comfort.
And the idea of home too. So many people are dispersed and not with their family of origin anymore. And I don't know necessarily if that's a good idea or if it's something that we need to just evolve and kind of let go of. The idea of maintaining a familiar tribe.
Mm,
But it seems like throughout the history of the human experiment that that seems to be where we function best is in communal settings
right.
where we're with familiar people on a regular basis and contributing and instead of just randomly moving about here and there for the sake of experiencing the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I wonder. I mean, I think yeah, how do we have a greater sense of rootedness and community, and without that becoming tribalism, right? Because that's like the flip side is like let's stick to our own, and we can't venture outside of it. But
Mm-hmm.
I think one thing that you do practice in ensemble playing that maybe relates to this is just that idea of multiple identities and like constantly changing perspective. So one moment in an ensemble you may be the lead, the next you're supportive, the next you're in conversation, and being able to switch those, and so there's the identity of your nuclear family or your partner and you, or then there's your country or there's your city. There, it's just like how do we, and there are the beliefs that you have that go with this community and go with that, and it can be confusing, I think. And part of the upheaval of the moment is like, yeah, who are my people, Um, but I guess I wish we'd become somehow more virtuosic um, at being able to adapt,
Mm-hmm.
while being more rooted. You know what I mean? Um, so that it's not, that not every issue becomes a binary this or that, which is dangerous, I think, for human beings. Yeah.
Well, and us and our bodies are an instrument, So I think we should learn how to play more in sync with each other,
Totally.
as an orchestra,
Yeah.
and our voices instead of being, well, there are pieces in music that are chaotic,
Sure.
and there are pieces in music that flow together. So I guess it's appreciating just the whole might sound corny, the symphony of life. you know?
Totally.
What would you like to close out with?
Well, we've kind of had stillness of the lake, walking. Why don't we go to galloping with another piece of Bach's? Or actually, it's from the same piece, different movement.
Okay.
This is from his solo sonata in A minor. So this is the last movement. Thanks. Thank you.